The telegram trembled in Hannah Larkin's gloved hands as she stepped off the train into the harsh Oklahoma wind, her right leg buckling slightly beneath her weight, forcing her to grip the rail with more force than dignity allowed. Enid sprawled before her in the April heat of 1889, all dirt streets and weather-worn buildings, a frontier town barely 6 months old since the land run had transformed Indian Territory into a scramble of opportunity and desperation. She had expected raw and untamed, but the reality struck deeper than imagination. The sun beating down on wooden storefronts that still smelled of fresh-cut lumber, the street churned to powder by countless wagons and horses. The limp had been with her since childhood, since the fever that had ravaged her body at age 7 and left her right leg twisted and weak, forever marking her as damaged goods in polite Boston society. Her mother had died 3 years ago, her father 2 months past, leaving her with nothing but debts and the cold shoulder of relatives who saw her as a burden they refused to carry. The advertisement in the matrimonial paper had seemed like Providence, a rancher seeking a wife, no specifications about beauty or perfection, just someone willing to work hard and make a life in Oklahoma Territory. She had written honestly about her condition, expecting rejection. Instead, Harrison Langford had replied within 2 weeks, his words simple and direct. "A limp does not change a person's character. If you are willing to come to Enid, I will meet you at the station on April 23rd. Now that day had arrived, and Hannah scanned the crowded platform for a man she had never seen, clutching a worn carpetbag that contained everything she owned. Men in dusty work clothes moved past her, some tipping their hats, others staring too long at her uneven gait as she shifted her weight. The afternoon sun hammered down and sweat traced lines through the dust on her face. "Miss Bennet." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured, carrying the weight of careful consideration. Hannah turned, her twisted leg making the movement awkward, and found herself looking up at a man who stood well over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered beneath a simple cotton shirt, his face weathered by sun and wind into premature lines, though he could not have been more than 30. His eyes, green as creek water, held a gentleness that contradicted his rough exterior. "Mr. Langford." Her voice came out smaller than intended, uncertainty making it waver. He removed his hat, revealing dark brown hair that needed cutting, and nodded. "Harrison. I hope the journey was not too difficult." His gaze flickered to her leg, then back to her face, and she braced herself for the disappointment, the regret, the polite excuse that would leave her stranded in a strange town with nowhere to go. Instead, he smiled, transforming his stern features into something unexpectedly warm. "You look tired. My wagon is just there. I thought we would go to the church first if that suits you, unless you need time to rest or reconsider." The directness caught her off guard. "The church?" "To marry, as we discussed in our letters. Unless you have changed your mind, which would be understandable given you have only just arrived and seen what rough country this is." Hannah studied his face for signs of mockery or impatience, but found only honest inquiry. The wind tugged at her traveling dress, and exhaustion pulled at her bones from 3 days on trains and hard benches. Everything sensible screamed that she should wait, should know this man better, should not bind herself legally to a stranger before even catching her breath. But sense had not saved her in Boston, had not prevented her from becoming a charity case pitied and avoided in equal measure. "I have not changed my mind," she said, lifting her chin. "I came here to marry you, and I am a woman of my word." Something flickered in his eyes, respect perhaps, or relief. "Then let me take your bag." He reached for her carpetbag with one hand and offered his other arm, not as a romantic gesture but as practical support. After a moment's hesitation, Hannah accepted it, letting him take some of her weight as they navigated the platform steps. His arm felt solid as oak beneath her hand, and he adjusted his pace to match hers without comment, as natural as breathing. The wagon stood at the end of the street, a sturdy work vehicle with a buckboard seat and 2 horses that looked better fed than most people Hannah had seen in her last months in Boston. Harrison helped her up to the seat with the same matter-of-fact courtesy, then stowed her bag in the back and climbed up beside her. "The church is just a few streets over," he said, taking up the reins. "Reverend Walsh is expecting us. He is a good man, came with the land run like most of us, determined to bring civilization to chaos." Hannah watched the town roll past, taking in the saloons and general stores, the land office doing brisk business, the clusters of tents that still housed those who had not yet built proper shelters. "How much land did you claim?" 160 acres, 4 miles west of town. "Good grazing land with a creek running through the eastern portion. I have been building the herd slowly, doing work for other ranchers to earn money for stock. The house is small but solid, built it myself over the winter." His words painted a picture of solitary labor, long days of physical work with no companion to share the burden or the hope. "Why did you send for a mail-order bride? Surely there are women here in town." Harrison glanced at her, and something shadowed his expression. "Not many, and those that are here have their pick of men. I am not much for socializing or pretty words. Figured a woman who would come all this way based on letters alone might value steady work and honest dealing over charm. And you do not mind my limp." She said it flatly, wanting the truth without decoration. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a small wooden church, its cross pointing toward the endless sky. When he turned to face her, his green eyes held hers without wavering. "Miss Bennet, I have broken my left arm twice, have scars across my back from a horse that threw me into barbed wire, and my right knee aches something fierce when it rains. Every person who works this land carries marks of the struggle. Your leg does not frighten me or concern me beyond hoping it does not cause you too much pain." The simple honesty of it struck something deep in Hannah's chest, a knot she had not realized she was carrying. "It hurts sometimes, especially when I walk long distances, but I can do my share of work. I will not be a burden to you. Then we will do just fine together." He climbed down and came around to help her, and this time when she took his arm, some of the rigidity had left her spine. Reverend Walsh proved to be a thin man with kind eyes and hands stained with ink from transcribing land deeds to supplement his meager church income. He asked them the required questions, satisfied himself that both entered the union willingly, and performed the brief ceremony with simple dignity. Harrison produced a thin gold band that had belonged to his mother, the only possession of value he admitted to owning, and slipped it onto Hannah's finger with hands that trembled slightly. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Harrison kissed her cheek with careful respect, as though she were made of glass that might shatter. Hannah felt the scratch of his unshaven face, smelled the honest scent of hard work and soap, and thought that she had perhaps not made the worst decision of her life. They signed the register, Harrison's signature bold and clear, Hannah's more careful with its Boston finishing school precision. The Reverend accepted the $2 Harrison counted out from a worn leather wallet and wished them well. Then they were back in the wagon, legally bound, 2 strangers who now shared a name and a future. The ride west out of town took them past other homesteads, some still raw claims marked only by stakes and tents, others showing signs of establishment with half-built houses and corrals. Harrison pointed out landmarks, identifying neighbors who lived miles apart but formed the loose community of settlers trying to tame the prairie. That is the Murphy claim. They have 3 children and came from Kansas. Beyond that rise is where the Johnsons settled, good people but struggling with the lack of rain this spring. Most folks help each other when they can, but everyone is stretched thin trying to establish themselves. The land rolled in gentle swells, grass already showing the pale gold of approaching summer despite April barely ending. Hannah could see for miles in every direction, a vastness that made Boston's crowded streets seem like a distant dream. The sky stretched enormous and blue, broken only by high clouds that promised no relief from the drought Harrison mentioned. "You miss the city?" Harrison asked as they crested a rise, and Hannah saw her new home spread before her. The house stood alone in a slight valley, protected from the worst winds by the surrounding swells of land. It was indeed small, perhaps 3 rooms at most, but solidly built from lumber that must have cost dearly. A barn stood nearby, larger than the house, and several corrals fanned out from it. A windmill turned lazily beside a water tank, and the creek Harrison had mentioned glittered in the lowering sun, lined with cottonwood trees that provided the only shade visible for miles. "No," Hannah said slowly, meaning it. "Boston held nothing for me but memories of being less than whole. This is vast and clean and new." Harrison looked at her with something like understanding. "That is how I felt when I rode into the land run, like I could finally breathe after being suffocated for 30 years. He drove the wagon down to the house and helped her descend, then retrieved her carpetbag from the back. The front door stood unlocked, opening into a main room that served as kitchen and living space combined. A black iron stove occupied one corner, a table with 2 chairs sat beneath the single window, and a rocking chair faced a small fireplace. Everything was clean but spare, functional without ornament. "Bedroom is through there," Harrison said, pointing to a door on the left. "I built a second room on the right, thought it could be for sewing or storage or whatever you might need. Privy is behind the house, and the creek has good water for washing. I know it is not much compared to what you are accustomed to." Hannah set down her bag and turned in a slow circle, taking in the rough plank floor, the walls that showed gaps where the wind would whistle through in winter, the utter absence of comfort beyond basic necessity. And yet Harrison had built this with his own hands, had hammered every nail and fitted every board while alone in the wilderness, preparing a place for a wife he had never met. "It is honest," she said finally. "That is more than I had in Boston." He nodded, some tension leaving his shoulders. "I will get your bag into the bedroom, then tend to the horses. There is salt pork and beans if you are hungry and bread I bought in town yesterday. I am not much of a cook, I will admit." "I can cook," Hannah said. "That much I learned well enough." She explored her new home while Harrison worked outside, her uneven gait carrying her from room to room. The bedroom held a rope bed with a corn husk mattress, a washstand with a chipped basin, and pegs on the wall for hanging clothes. A window looked toward the creek, and Hannah imagined waking to that view each morning, watching the seasons change the landscape. The second room stood empty except for a crate that served as a makeshift table, but it had good light from a west-facing window. Hannah could picture it filled with purpose, though what that purpose might be remained unclear. For now, it simply represented possibility, space to grow into. By the time Harrison came back inside, she had found the meager food supplies and started coffee heating on the stove. He stopped in the doorway, seeming surprised to find her working, then removed his hat and hung it on a peg by the door. "I should have started supper before going to fetch you," he said. "You must be exhausted from traveling." "Keeping busy helps," Hannah replied, stirring the pot of beans she had found. Sitting still just makes me think too much. He washed his hands in a basin by the door, then joined her at the stove. What would you be thinking about? Hannah glanced at him, this tall stranger who was now her husband, and decided that if they were to make any kind of life together, honesty would serve better than polite evasion. Whether I made a terrible mistake. Whether you are disappointed now that you see me in full light rather than shadows on a train platform. Whether I can actually manage a life this hard when I struggled to climb stairs without pain. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and Hannah feared she had said too much, revealed too much weakness too soon. Then he pulled out one of the chairs and sat, his large frame making the furniture seem suddenly small. I will tell you something true, he said, his voice low and serious. I sent for a mail-order bride because I am not a man who knows how to court or charm. I came from a hard family in Missouri, left when I was 16 because my father's fists taught me what I did not want to become. Worked cattle drives and ranch jobs for 14 years, saving every penny I could spare, waiting for a chance to claim land of my own. When the government opened Oklahoma Territory, I rode in the land run and staked my claim, and I finally had something that belonged to me. He paused, rubbing his weathered hands together. But land is just dirt without someone to share it with. I am 30 years old and I have spent most of my life alone. When I wrote in that advertisement, I was not looking for a pretty face or a perfect body. I was looking for someone who understands that life is hard work and sometimes painful but still worth living. Your letters showed me a woman with courage and honesty. That is what I wanted, and that is what I got. Hannah's throat tightened. You barely know me, true enough. But I know you got on a train and traveled 1,000 miles to marry a stranger because you are brave enough to take a chance on a new life. I know you wrote honestly about your limp instead of hiding it until I saw for myself. I know you are standing here cooking supper on your wedding day in a house that is probably worse than any servant's quarters you have seen back east, and you have not complained once. He met her eyes. That tells me plenty about your character. I had nowhere else to go, Hannah admitted quietly. My father died owing money, and his relatives took everything of value. I was sleeping in a church charity house, doing laundry for pennies. Coming here was not bravery so much as necessity. Necessity takes courage too, Harrison said. Lots of people in desperate circumstances just give up or make choices that destroy them. You chose to keep fighting for something better. That is worthy of respect. The beans began to bubble, and Hannah turned her attention back to them, blinking against the sting in her eyes. She had spent so long being regarded as damaged, as lesser, as someone to pity or avoid. Harrison's matter-of-fact acceptance felt like water after years of thirst. They ate together at the small table as dusk gathered outside, the conversation sparse but comfortable. Harrison told her about the cattle he had managed to acquire, 20 head that would hopefully grow into a proper herd over the coming years. He explained the seasonal work of ranching, the constant battle against drought and disease and predators. His words painted a picture of endless labor and uncertain reward, but his voice held steady determination. Hannah told him about Boston, about her father's work as a clerk before illness took his health and left him unable to work, about her mother's quiet strength in the face of poverty, about the slow grinding down of hope until the charity house became her only option. She spoke more freely than she had intended, perhaps because Harrison listened without judgment, his green eyes attentive in the lamplight. When the meal ended and the dishes were washed, an awkward silence fell. They were married but strangers. The bedroom waited with its single bed, and Hannah felt anxiety rise in her chest. Harrison must have seen it in her face because he cleared his throat and stood. "I will bed down in the barn tonight," he said quietly. "Give you time to settle in. We do not need to rush into things we are not ready for." Relief and something else, perhaps disappointment, mingled in Hannah's response. "You do not need to do that. This is your house." "It is our house now," Harrison corrected gently. "And a good marriage needs more than legal papers. It needs trust, and trust takes time to build." He collected a blanket from a shelf. "I will be in early to start breakfast. Sleep well, Hannah." He was gone before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Hannah stood alone in the small house, her house now, and felt the weight of the day settle over her like a heavy quilt. She made her way to the bedroom, her leg aching from the long day of travel and standing, and prepared for bed in the light of a single candle. The corn husk mattress rustled beneath her as she lay down, and through the window she could see stars scattered across the black sky, more stars than she had ever seen through Boston's coal smoke and city lights. Somewhere outside, Harrison was settling into the barn, giving her space and time he sensed she needed. The kindness of it, the thoughtfulness, made her chest ache with an emotion she could not quite name. She had married a stranger today, bound herself to a hard life in an unforgiving land. But as she drifted toward sleep, Hannah thought that perhaps she had also found something she had stopped believing in back in Boston, something as vast and open as the Oklahoma sky. She had found the possibility of home. Morning came with the sound of the door opening and Harrison moving quietly in the main room, building up the fire in the stove. Hannah woke slowly, disoriented for a moment before memory returned. Married, Oklahoma, a new life beginning with the sunrise. She dressed quickly despite her legs' morning stiffness, braiding her dark hair in a simple plait and smoothing her second-best dress. When she emerged from the bedroom, Harrison was measuring coffee into the pot, his hair damp from washing at the pump. "Morning," he said, glancing over. "Hope I did not wake you too early." "I am accustomed to rising with the sun," Hannah replied, joining him at the stove. "What needs doing?" Harrison looked surprised, then thoughtful. "Well, I need to check the cattle in the north pasture and repair some fence that is sagging." "But that is rough riding, probably not suitable for—" He stopped himself, seeming to realize how the words might sound. "For someone with a limp," Hannah finished calmly. "I cannot ride, Mr. Langford, never learned, but I can certainly find useful work around the house and yard." "Harrison," he corrected. "We are married now, and I meant no offense. None taken. I know my limitations." She surveyed the kitchen area with a practical eye. "The garden needs planting if we want vegetables this summer, and I notice the chicken coop is empty. Do you have no hens?" "Had 4, but a fox got them over the winter. Have not had time to get to town for more." "Then perhaps that could be a next town day errand. Chickens would provide eggs at least and meat when they stop laying." Hannah poured 2 cups of coffee as Harrison sliced bread. "And I can see the windowsills need proper curtains. That I can manage with needle and thread if you have spare fabric." They fell into a pattern over the following days, finding a rhythm in their separate tasks. Harrison worked the ranch from dawn until dusk, mending fence and moving cattle, and completing the 100 tasks that kept the operation running. Hannah tended the house, cooked meals that were more varied than Harrison's bachelor fare, and began planting a garden in the plot beside the house where Harrison had already turned the soil. He was respectful to a fault, still sleeping in the barn, speaking politely and keeping physical distance. Hannah appreciated the consideration but also felt the strangeness of it, married to a man who treated her more like a boarder than a wife. Yet she could not fault his reasoning. Trust, he had said, took time. On Sunday, Harrison suggested they attend the church service in town. "Not that I am particularly devout," he admitted as they readied the wagon, but it is a way to meet the neighbors. Might be good for you to know some other women, not spend all your time alone out here." The service drew perhaps 30 people. Families in their Sunday best gathered in the small church to sing hymns and hear Reverend Walsh preach about perseverance through hardship. Hannah sat beside Harrison on the hard wooden pew, intensely aware of the curious glances directed their way. After the service, several women approached, their smiles friendly but their eyes sharp with assessment. "You must be the bride Harrison fetched from back east," said a plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile. "I am Martha Murphy. My husband John and I have the claim north of yours. This is Elizabeth Johnson, and that tall drink of water over there is Susan Hartley." The women welcomed Hannah with genuine warmth, asking about her journey and her impressions of Oklahoma territory, carefully not staring at her uneven gait as she shifted her weight. Hannah found herself relaxing, answering questions and asking her own about gardening in the Oklahoma soil and where to buy chickens and whether the drought would break soon. "No one knows about the rain," Martha said with a sigh, "but we keep praying and trying. That is all we can do." Harrison spoke with the men. Their conversation focused on cattle prices and grass conditions, and whether the railroad would extend service further west. Hannah watched him from the corner of her eye, seeing how he stood slightly apart even while conversing, a man accustomed to solitude even in company. On the ride home, Harrison was quieter than usual, his hands steady on the reins but his expression distant. Hannah let the silence stretch for a while before speaking. "Did something happen in town?" He glanced at her, surprised. "What makes you ask? You seem troubled." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, then sighed. "Jack Murphy, Martha's husband, asked if I was happy with my mail-order bride. Made a comment about how I had gotten damaged goods, but at least you seemed pleasant enough." Anger flashed hot in Hannah's chest. "I see. I told him that I got exactly what I wanted and he should keep his opinions to himself." Harrison's jaw was tight. "He meant it as sympathy, I think, but it struck me wrong. You are not damaged goods, Hannah. You are a person who happens to walk with a limp. There is a difference." The anger faded into something warmer. "Thank you for defending me." "I was defending truth, not just you. Though you deserve defending too." He met her eyes briefly. "People can be cruel even when they think they are being kind. I have no patience for it." They were quiet the rest of the way home, but the silence felt companionable rather than awkward. That evening, as they sat on the porch after supper watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Hannah found herself studying her husband's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the capable hands resting on his knees. "Harrison, you do not have to sleep in the barn anymore." He turned to look at her, and something shifted in his expression, surprise and warmth and perhaps relief. "Are you certain we are married, and you have been nothing but respectful and kind?" "I think we have had time enough to learn each other's basic character." She felt her cheeks warm but pressed on. "Besides, it seems foolish for you to be uncomfortable when there is a perfectly good bed going mostly unused." "I do not want to make you uncomfortable," Harrison said carefully. "You will not. I trust you." And saying it, Hannah realized it was true. In the weeks since her arrival, Harrison had proven himself steady and honest, thoughtful and patient. The fear she had carried from Boston, the expectation of disappointment and rejection, had gradually eased in the face of his consistent decency. That night, they lay side by side in the rope bed, separated by careful distance and layers of night clothes, the darkness making the small room feel both intimate and safe. Hannah could hear Harrison's steady breathing, feel the warmth of him beside her, and found herself less anxious than she had anticipated. "Hannah." His voice came soft through the dark. Yes, I am glad you answered my advertisement. She smiled, though he could not see it. So am I. Sleep came easier than it had in months, and when Hannah woke in the early morning light, she found Harrison's arm had found its way across her waist in sleep, a gentle weight that felt more comforting than confining. She lay still for a moment, watching him sleep, seeing how the harsh lines of his face softened in rest, before carefully extracting herself to start the day. Spring deepened into summer, and the drought Harrison had worried about proved serious. The creek level dropped, and the grass turned brittle and pale. Harrison worked longer hours, moving the cattle to better grazing, hauling water, checking constantly for signs of disease or distress in the herd. He came home exhausted each evening, his face drawn with worry that he tried to hide. Hannah had planted a garden, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn soil with careful watering from the precious well supply. She had also acquired 6 chickens from a farmer in town who was giving up his claim and heading back east, and the hens provided eggs that varied their diet. The house had taken on small touches of comfort. Curtains on the windows sewn from flour sacks she had dyed with walnut hulls, a braided rug by the door, wildflowers in a jar on the table. She had also learned the ranch better, mapping it with slow walks that accommodated her leg. The creek, even reduced, remained a place of beauty where cottonwoods rustled and small animals came to drink at dawn and dusk. The northern pasture rolled in gentle swells, dotted with Harrison's small herd. The barn held 2 horses, the wagon team, and now a milk cow Harrison had traded work for, providing them with milk and butter. On a particularly hot evening in July, Hannah prepared supper while watching Harrison through the window. He was working with one of the horses in the corral, patient and steady in his movements despite obvious fatigue. The horse, a young gelding he had gotten in trade, was skittish and untrained, but Harrison never lost his temper, just kept working with calm persistence until the animal settled. When he finally came inside, his shirt was soaked with sweat and dust coated his skin. He washed at the basin, and Hannah saw him wince as he moved his left shoulder. "You are hurt," she said, setting down the spoon she had been using. "Just sore." The gelding pulled hard on the lead rope and wrenched it some. "Sit down." Harrison looked surprised but obeyed, settling into one of the chairs. Hannah moved behind him and carefully began working her fingers into the knotted muscles of his shoulder. He tensed initially, then gradually relaxed under her touch. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice slightly strained. "My mother used to get terrible headaches. I would rub her neck and shoulders to help ease them." Hannah kept her touch firm but gentle, feeling the tension slowly release. "You work too hard, Harrison. No choice. The cattle need constant attention in weather like this. I know, but you are no good to them if you work yourself into collapse." He was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Thank you, Hannah, for taking care of me. We are married. That is what married people do, is it not? Care for each other, I suppose it is." She finished with his shoulder and came around to face him, leaning against the table. Harrison looked up at her, his green eyes tired but warm in the lamplight. "Hannah, I want to tell you something." "All right." "When I sent for a mail-order bride, I hoped for a partnership, someone to share the work and the struggle. I figured that was the most I could reasonably expect." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "But somewhere over these past months, this has become more than a partnership for me. You have become more than just a capable housekeeper and a pleasant companion." Hannah's heart began to beat faster. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I have come to care for you deeply, to look forward to seeing you each evening when I come home, to think about you during the day when I am out with the herd, to feel grateful every morning when I wake beside you." He stood, bringing them nearly face to face despite the difference in their heights. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, and I wanted you to know it, even though we did not enter this marriage expecting such things." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, emotion swelling in her chest. "Harrison, you do not have to say anything back," he interjected quickly. "I know this marriage was necessity for you, not choice made from affection. I just wanted to be honest about how I feel." "You foolish man," Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Did you think I could live with you day after day, see your kindness and your strength and your gentle patience and feel nothing? Did you think I have not been falling in love with you too?" Hope and wonder transformed his face. "Truly, truly. I thought I would never have this, never have someone look at me the way you do, as though my limp is just part of who I am rather than a flaw that defines me. You make me feel whole, Harrison. You make me feel cherished." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull back, and cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "You are cherished. You are treasured. Hannah, may I kiss you properly? As a man kisses the woman he loves, please," she whispered. His lips met hers with a gentleness that made her ache, a tenderness that spoke of reverence and barely restrained passion. Hannah melted into the kiss, her hands finding his chest, feeling his heart hammering beneath her palms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I have wanted to do that since the day you arrived," Harrison admitted, his forehead resting against hers. "You have remarkable self-control," Hannah said, and he laughed, the sound warm and genuine. That night, their marriage became complete in truth as well as law, and Hannah discovered that physical intimacy could be beautiful rather than frightening when entered into with love and care. Harrison was patient and attentive, making sure of her comfort, and afterwards they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, speaking soft words of affection. "I never thought I would have this," Hannah said, tracing patterns on his chest. "A home, a husband who loves me, a life that feels full despite its hardships." "I never thought I would have it either," Harrison replied, his fingers combing through her unbound hair. "I figured I would work this ranch alone until I died or went broke. You changed everything, Hannah. You made this house a home." She tilted her face up to kiss him again, marveling at how natural it felt now, how right. They made love again as the moon crossed the sky, and Hannah thought that she had traveled 1,000 miles and given up everything familiar to find something she had not known she was seeking. She had found a love that accepted her completely, flaws and all. The drought finally broke in August with a series of thunderstorms that rolled across the prairie, in spectacular displays of lightning and wind. Harrison and Hannah stood on the porch watching the rain fall, breathing in the smell of wet earth, laughing with relief as water soaked into the thirsty ground. "This should green up the grass again," Harrison said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. "Give the herd a chance to put on weight before winter." The storm passed, and in its wake the land transformed. Grass grew lush and green, wildflowers bloomed in sudden profusion, and the creek ran full and swift. Harrison's cattle fattened on the improved forage, and his mood lightened with the better prospects. In early September, Martha Murphy arrived in a wagon, bringing with her Elizabeth Johnson and Susan Hartley. Hannah, surprised but pleased, welcomed them inside and made coffee while the women settled around her small table. "We have come on important business," Martha announced, her eyes twinkling. "The town is planning a harvest dance in October, and we need to make sure you and Harrison will attend." "A dance?" Hannah felt her stomach drop. "I cannot dance, not with my leg." "Nonsense," Elizabeth said firmly. "Everyone dances at these gatherings. It is about community, not about how fancy your steps are." "I would just embarrass Harrison," Hannah protested, "make people stare and whisper." Susan reached across the table and took Hannah's hand. Let me tell you something about this territory. Every single person here has struggled and survived things that would have broken us back east. Nobody has room to judge anyone else. And if anyone does stare or whisper, they will answer to the rest of us. Besides, Martha added with a grin, most of the men are such terrible dancers that no one will notice anything wrong with how you move. My John steps on my feet at least 3 times every dance. Despite herself, Hannah laughed. The women spent the afternoon visiting, sharing news and recipes and gossip, and by the time they left, Hannah had agreed to attend the harvest dance, though anxiety still knotted in her stomach at the thought. That evening she mentioned it to Harrison as they washed the supper dishes together, a comfortable routine they had fallen into. A harvest dance sounds nice, he said. Would you like to go? The women say we should, but Harrison, I cannot dance properly. My leg will not allow it. He set down the plate he was drying and turned to face her. Do you remember what I said to you in my very first letter? Hannah thought back to those early correspondences, written when she had still been in Boston and he had been a stranger offering an uncertain hope. You said many things. I said that a limp does not change a person's character. He stepped closer, taking her damp hands in his. Hannah, I do not care if we do not dance at all if we sit on the sidelines the entire evening. And if we do dance, I do not care if we move half as fast as everyone else or look awkward doing it. The only thing I care about is being with you. But people will talk. Let them. I am proud to be your husband. I want everyone to see us together, to know that I have the most wonderful wife in Oklahoma territory. Hannah felt tears threaten again, emotion constantly close to the surface these days now that she had learned what it meant to be truly loved. What if I step on your feet? Then we will be even because I am bound to step on yours. He smiled, that transformation that still made her heart skip. Hannah, we will dance slow and that is just fine. That is more than fine. That is perfect. She leaned into him, letting him wrap his strong arms around her, feeling safe and cherished. How did I get so lucky to find you? I have been wondering the same thing. The weeks leading up to the harvest dance passed quickly. The ranch demanded constant attention as Harrison prepared for winter, laying in hay and firewood, making repairs to buildings before the cold arrived. Hannah preserved vegetables from her garden, putting up jars of beans and tomatoes and pickles to supplement their diet through the barren months ahead. She also, with careful stitching late at night, made herself a new dress from fabric Harrison had brought from town. It was simple calico in a deep blue that matched her eyes, but it fit better than her worn traveling clothes, and she felt pretty wearing it. The night of the harvest dance arrived with crisp autumn air and a sky full of stars. Hannah dressed carefully, her hands trembling slightly with nerves. Harrison put on a clean shirt and his best pants, slicked his hair back with water, and told her she looked beautiful with such sincerity that she almost believed it. The dance was held in the largest barn in town, belonging to a rancher named Samuel Hendricks, who had been among the first to establish himself after the land run. Lanterns hung from the rafters, casting warm light over the crowd already gathered when Harrison and Hannah arrived. Tables along one wall held food contributions from every family, and in the corner, 3 men with a fiddle, a guitar, and a mouth harp were tuning their instruments. Martha Murphy spotted them immediately and waved, beckoning them to join her family. Hannah felt the curious looks as she walked in, her limp more pronounced than usual from nerves and the long wagon ride, but Harrison kept his hand firm on her back, steady and supportive. The evening began with eating, everyone filling plates and visiting, children running wild with the rare freedom of a community gathering. Hannah found herself drawn into conversations with the women, laughing at stories about ranch mishaps and sharing her own tales of learning to cook on a temperamental wood stove. When the music started, couples began forming on the makeshift dance floor, moving to a lively reel. Hannah watched, her foot tapping to the rhythm despite her certainty that she could not join in. Harrison leaned close and spoke into her ear over the music. "Ready, Harrison? I cannot move that fast. Then we will wait for a slower song." He settled into his chair with the patience of a man accustomed to waiting, his hand finding hers under the table and squeezing gently. Two faster songs passed before the fiddle player announced a waltz. Harrison stood and offered his hand with a slight bow. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Langford?" Hannah's heart hammered, but she took his hand and let him lead her to the floor. Other couples swirled around them as the music began, but Harrison simply took her in his arms, one hand at her waist and the other clasping hers, and began to move in a gentle swaying pattern that barely qualified as dancing. "Just follow my lead," he murmured. "Slow and easy." Hannah focused on his face rather than her feet, letting him guide her through simple steps that accommodated her limited mobility. They moved far slower than the other dancers, barely turning, more swaying together than properly waltzing. But Harrison held her gently, his green eyes fixed on hers, and gradually Hannah relaxed into the movement. "See," he said softly, "we are dancing. We are barely moving. We are moving together. That is what matters." Around them, Hannah was peripherally aware of other couples sweeping past, of the music filling the warm barn, of children weaving between the dancers with delighted shrieks. But her world had narrowed to Harrison's arms, his steady presence, the small smile playing at his lips. "I love you," she said suddenly, needing to speak it aloud. His smile widened into a grin. "I love you too, so much that it sometimes scares me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I never had anything this good before. Makes me worry it might disappear." Hannah stretched up and he bent down, and they kissed there on the dance floor, slow and sweet, while the waltz played on around them. When they broke apart, she saw Martha Murphy watching with a satisfied smile, and Elizabeth Johnson wiping her eyes, and even stern Susan Hartley looked pleased. They danced 3 more slow songs that evening, Harrison patiently guiding her through simple movements, never showing embarrassment at their ungainly progress. Between dances, they ate cake and visited with neighbors, and Harrison introduced Hannah proudly to everyone they met. No one made comments about her limp or their awkward dancing. Instead, people smiled and welcomed her warmly into the community. On the ride home under a sky blazing with stars, Hannah leaned against Harrison's shoulder, tired but happy in a way that felt both new and permanent. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For not being ashamed of me. For dancing slow and saying it was fine." Harrison pulled the wagon to a stop, there in the middle of the dark prairie with nothing around them but grass and sky. He turned to face her, taking both her hands. "Hannah, I need you to understand something. I am not being kind when I say your limp does not matter to me. I am not being patient or charitable or any of those things. I am simply telling you the truth. When I look at you, I see the woman who took a chance on a hard life with a stranger. I see the woman who makes our small house feel like home. I see the woman I love more than I thought it was possible to love anyone. Your leg is just part of you, the same way my broken nose and scarred back are part of me. It does not define you, and it does not change how I feel." "Your nose is not broken," Hannah said, her voice unsteady with emotion. "It is, actually. Got into a fight when I was 18 and took a punch that bent it sideways. Said it myself, but it never sat quite right after." He touched the bridge of his nose self-consciously. "Point is, we all have our damages and our scars. They do not make us less. They just make us who we are." Hannah kissed him then, there in the stopped wagon with the horses stamping impatiently and the stars wheeling overhead. She kissed him with all the love and gratitude and joy that filled her heart to bursting, and he kissed her back with matching fervor. When they finally made it home and settled into their bed, they made love with the slow tenderness that had become their habit, taking time to savor each touch and whispered word. Afterwards, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Hannah thought about how far she had come from that terrified woman stepping off the train in Enid. She had found not just a home, but a place where she belonged completely. She had found not just a husband, but a partner who saw her truly and loved her anyway. She had found, in the wild and unforgiving Oklahoma territory, a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined in Boston. Winter came hard that year, bringing snow and howling winds that piled drifts against the house and barn. Harrison worked constantly to keep the cattle alive, breaking ice on the water tank daily, hauling hay to the pastures, checking for animals in distress. Hannah kept the house warm and made sure hot food and coffee waited for him each time he stumbled back inside, half frozen and exhausted. On the worst days, when the snow fell so thick that Harrison could not risk going farther than the barn, they stayed inside together, and Hannah taught him to read better than his basic education had managed. He was embarrassed at first by his halting progress, but she was patient, and gradually he improved. In return, he taught her to play checkers with a set he carved from scraps of wood, and they spent long evenings in front of the fireplace locked in mock serious competition. It was during one of these snowbound weeks that Hannah realized her monthly bleeding had not come. She said nothing at first, not wanting to raise hopes that might be disappointed. But as January turned to February and still no bleeding came, and her breasts began to ache and her stomach felt unsettled in the mornings, she became more certain. One evening, as they prepared for bed, she finally spoke. "Harrison, I think I might be with child." He stopped in the act of removing his boots and looked up at her, his expression unreadable. "Are you certain, fairly certain? All the signs are there." Harrison stood slowly and crossed to where she sat on the edge of the bed. He knelt before her, bringing them eye to eye, and took her hands. "How do you feel about it?" "Terrified," Hannah admitted, "but also happy. Do you want children?" "I want whatever makes you happy." He paused, then added with careful honesty, "But yes, I would love to have children with you, a family." "I am frightened about the birth," Hannah said quietly. "My mother told me once that childbirth is dangerous for any woman, but especially difficult for those with leg problems. And the nearest doctor is in Enid, miles away. Then we will make sure you have the best care possible when the time comes. Martha Murphy has helped deliver half the babies in this area, and I will be with you every moment if you want me there. You would do that. Most men avoid the birthing room. I am not most men. You are my wife and I love you. I will be wherever you need me to be." Hannah felt tears spill down her cheeks, the constant emotion of early pregnancy making her weep at the smallest kindness. Harrison wiped her tears gently with his thumbs and kissed her forehead. "We are going to be fine," he said firmly. "You, me, and this baby. We are going to build a good life together." Spring came eventually, as it always does, melting the snow and revealing the brown grass beneath. Harrison's cattle had survived the winter with minimal losses, a victory he attributed to luck and constant vigilance. As the weather warmed, he increased the herd with 3 new calves born in quick succession, hopeful signs for the ranch's future. Hannah's pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling as the weeks passed. She continued working as much as she could, tending her garden and the chickens, cooking and cleaning. though Harrison tried to make her rest more than her restless nature wanted. The baby kicked strongly, and Harrison would place his large hands on her belly in the evenings, marveling at the life growing within. Martha Murphy visited regularly, checking on Hannah's progress with the practiced eye of an experienced midwife. "Everything looks good," she assured them during a late spring visit. "The baby is positioned well, and Hannah is strong despite her leg. I expect things will go just fine when the time comes." "When will that be?" Harrison asked, hovering anxiously nearby. "Another month, maybe 6 weeks. First babies like to take their time." Martha patted his arm. "Try not to worry so much. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Harrison said, and both Martha and Hannah laughed at his fierce protectiveness. In early June, on a warm morning with meadowlarks singing in the grass, Hannah's water broke while she was gathering eggs. She called for Harrison, who came running from the barn, and together they made it back to the house just as the first real contraction started. Harrison sent the young Murphy boy, who had been visiting to earn money doing chores, racing to fetch Martha. The labor was long and difficult. Hannah had been right to fear it, her twisted leg making it harder to find comfortable positions, and the pain seemed endless. But Harrison stayed with her throughout, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, speaking encouragement when she wanted to give up. Martha worked with calm efficiency, guiding Hannah through each contraction, and as the sun set on the longest day of Hannah's life, a thin, furious wail filled the bedroom. "A boy," Martha announced, holding up the red, squalling infant. "A healthy boy with good lungs." Hannah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure, while Martha cleaned the baby and wrapped him in soft cloth. When she finally placed the bundle in Hannah's arms, Hannah looked down at the tiny face, the miniature features, and felt something profound shift in her chest. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother." Harrison, who had been standing frozen by the bed, slowly sank down beside them. "He is perfect," he breathed, touching one tiny fist with a finger. "Hannah, you did so well. I am so proud of you." "We need a name," Hannah said, unable to look away from her son's face. "What should we call him?" They had discussed names during the pregnancy, arguing good-naturedly over options. Now, looking at the baby, Harrison said, "What about Thomas?" "It was my grandfather's name, the only decent man in my family." "Thomas Langford," Hannah tested it, and the baby made a small sound as though responding. "I think he likes it. Thomas it is." Martha showed them how to care for their son, how to help him nurse, how to change his cloths and support his head. She stayed through the night, making sure both Hannah and the baby were stable, before finally heading home with promises to return soon. Alone with their newborn son, Hannah and Harrison sat together in the lamplight, taking turns holding him, marveling at the miracle of his existence. Thomas had Harrison's green eyes and Hannah's dark hair, and he nursed eagerly when Hannah guided him to her breast, his tiny hands grasping at her. "I cannot believe we made him," Hannah said softly. "That he is ours." "A family," Harrison said, his voice thick with emotion. "We are a real family now." The summer passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings, but also moments of pure joy as Thomas grew and changed daily. Harrison proved to be a devoted father, walking the floor with the baby when he cried at night, changing cloths without complaint, speaking to his son in a gentle voice Hannah had never heard him use before. The ranch work continued, as it always must, but Harrison hired a young man from town to help with the heavier labor, allowing him more time with Hannah and Thomas. They fell into new routines, Hannah nursing the baby while Harrison prepared meals, both of them exhausted but happier than either had imagined possible. In August, Martha Murphy organized a christening at the church in town, and half the county seemed to attend, bringing gifts of hand-sewn clothes and carved toys for Thomas. Hannah stood beside Harrison at the front of the church, their son in her arms, and felt overwhelmed by the community that had embraced her so completely. After the service, as people mingled outside in the sunshine, Elizabeth Johnson approached Hannah with a shy smile. "I have news of my own," she said quietly. "I am expecting, due in February." "How wonderful!" Hannah embraced her carefully, mindful of Thomas between them. "You must come visit often. We can complain about sleepless nights together." Other women gathered around, offering advice and congratulations, and Hannah realized with a start that she had friends here, genuine friends who cared about her well-being. Boston and its cold isolation seemed like someone else's life now, a story she had read rather than lived. That evening, after Thomas had finally settled to sleep in the cradle Harrison had built, Hannah and Harrison sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky. Hannah leaned against her husband's shoulder, her body still recovering from childbirth but her heart full. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Happier than I have any right to be," Hannah replied honestly. "Sometimes I wake in the morning and cannot believe this is my life, that I have you and Thomas in this home. You have every right to be happy. You deserve all of this and more." He kissed the top of her head. "I am the one who got lucky. I put an advertisement in a paper hoping for a decent partnership, and instead I got the love of my life." "We both got lucky," Hannah corrected. "Two lonely people who found each other against all odds." Thomas made a small sound from inside, and they both tensed, waiting to see if he would wake fully. But the sound subsided into the rhythmic breathing of deep sleep, and they relaxed again. "I have been thinking," Harrison said slowly. "The ranch is doing well enough now that I could expand the herd more aggressively. Maybe hire that young fellow permanently, build a proper bunkhouse for help. Make this into something substantial to pass on to Thomas and any other children we might have." "You want more children?" Hannah asked, surprised and pleased. "If you are willing. I know the birth was hard on you, but I think you are an incredible mother, and I would love to have more sons and daughters to fill this house." Hannah thought about the pain and fear of childbirth, but also about the overwhelming joy of holding Thomas, watching him grow, seeing Harrison's face light up every time he looked at their son. "I would like more children," she said softly. "A few years apart, perhaps, to let my body recover. But yes, I want Thomas to have brothers and sisters. Then we will build our family slowly and carefully, just like we built our marriage." Harrison stood and helped Hannah to her feet, mindful as always of her leg. "Come on. Let us go to bed before Thomas wakes for his night feeding." They moved through their nighttime routine with the ease of long practice, changing into nightclothes and settling into bed together. Hannah curled against Harrison's solid warmth, and he wrapped around her protectively, one hand resting on her hip. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, both of you." His hand moved to rest on her stomach, though it would be long before another child grew there. "Thank you for coming here, Hannah, for taking a chance on a lonely rancher with nothing to offer but hard work and an uncertain future." "You offered me everything that mattered," Hannah replied. "Acceptance, respect, love. That is more than most people ever find." They drifted to sleep wrapped in each other's arms, and when Thomas woke crying an hour later, they rose together to care for him, a team united in love and purpose. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. Another drought tested them when Thomas was 2, requiring Harrison to sell off some cattle to survive, but the ranch recovered as the rains returned. Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Grace when Thomas was 3, an easier birth that gave her confidence. 2 years later, another son arrived, whom they called William. The house grew crowded with 3 children, so Harrison added 2 more rooms, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. The ranch prospered as Harrison's hard work and careful management built the herd to nearly 100 head of cattle. He hired 2 permanent hands, young men glad for steady work, and built a bunkhouse behind the barn. Hannah's limp never improved, and some days it pained her more than others, especially as she aged and her body bore the wear of multiple pregnancies and hard work. But Harrison remained constant in his attentiveness, helping her when needed but never treating her as helpless. When she struggled, he would simply adjust his pace to match hers, slow and steady, just as he had that first night at the harvest dance. The community around them grew as well, Enid transforming from a raw frontier town into an established settlement with proper schools and churches and businesses. Hannah joined with other women in various projects, organizing a library and a quilting circle and fundraisers for families hit by hardship. She found purpose beyond her family, though they remained her primary joy. Thomas grew tall like his father, with the same steady temperament and capable hands. Grace proved to be spirited and clever, keeping her parents on their toes with her endless questions and adventurous nature. William was quieter than his siblings, content to follow Thomas around and learn from his older brother. On the 10th anniversary of her arrival in Enid, Harrison surprised Hannah by taking her back to town for another dance, their first since that autumn harvest gathering so many years before. Martha Murphy had agreed to watch the children overnight, and Harrison had clearly planned the outing carefully. They dressed in their finest clothes. Hannah in a new dress Harrison had somehow acquired without her knowledge, and rode to town in the wagon. The dance was being held in a new community hall that had been built the previous summer, and it seemed half the county had turned out. As they entered, Hannah felt the same nervousness she had experienced a decade ago, her limp perhaps more pronounced now after 3 pregnancies and 10 years of hard work. But Harrison simply took her arm with the same steady support he always offered and led her inside with his head held high. The music started, and couples filled the dance floor for a lively reel. Harrison and Hannah watched from the sidelines, clapping along to the rhythm, visiting with neighbors they had known for years. When the fiddle player announced a waltz, Harrison turned to Hannah with a familiar smile. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Langford?" "You may, Mr. Langford." He led her onto the floor and took her in his arms exactly as he had 10 years before, and they began to move in the same gentle, swaying pattern that barely qualified as dancing. Around them, other couples swept and twirled, but Harrison kept his eyes on Hannah's face, guiding her through simple steps with patient care. "We are still terrible at this," Hannah said, laughing. "We are dancing slow," Harrison replied, "and that is just fine. That is perfect." They swayed together as the music played, and Hannah looked up at the man who had taken a chance on a mail-order bride with a limp, who had promised they would dance slow and meant it as no limitation but simply an accommodation of love. She thought about the lonely, frightened woman who had stepped off the train into his life, and the strong, confident woman she had become through his steady support. "What are you thinking?" Harrison asked, seeing the emotion in her face. "That I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Every hard moment, every struggle, every fear, all of it, just to end up here with you." He pulled her closer, breaking the formal dance hold to simply embrace her there on the floor, swaying gently as the waltz played on. "I would too. Best decision I ever made was placing that advertisement. Second best was climbing into that wagon to meet your train. I love you, Harrison Langford. I love you, Hannah Langford, for the rest of my life and beyond." They danced 2 more waltzes that evening, slow and steady, perfectly content in their ungainly movements. When they finally headed home under a canopy of stars, Hannah leaned against Harrison's shoulder and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. The years continued to pass, as years do. Thomas grew into a fine young man and fell in love with Elizabeth Johnson's daughter, Sarah, bringing her home to the ranch as his bride when he turned 21. Grace married a schoolteacher from town and moved to Enid, though she visited the ranch frequently with her husband and growing family. William decided to stay on the ranch, working alongside his father and eventually taking over more of the operation as Harrison aged. Hannah's hair turned gray, and her limp grew more pronounced with the arthritis that settled into her twisted leg. But Harrison's devotion never wavered. When walking became too difficult, he built her a chair with wheels that he had seen in a catalog, allowing her to move around the house and yard with greater ease. When her hands grew stiff with age, he learned to help with sewing and mending without complaint. They grew old together on the ranch they had built, surrounded by children and grandchildren, watching the Oklahoma Territory become a state in 1907, and marveling at how much had changed since that land run of 1889. The wild frontier they had known softened into civilization, though the land itself remained as vast and beautiful as ever. On a warm spring evening in 1920, Hannah sat on the porch in her wheeled chair, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Harrison sat beside her in the rocking chair he had built 30 years ago, their hands clasped between them. They were both in their early 50s now, aged by hard work but still strong in body and spirit. "You remember the day we met?" Hannah asked, though they had told the story countless times to their children and grandchildren. "Every detail," Harrison replied, his voice rough with age but still warm. "You stood on that platform looking terrified and determined in equal measure, and I thought you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I thought you were going to reject me when you saw my limp. I thought you were going to run back to Boston when you saw how rough everything was." He squeezed her hand gently. "Good thing we were both wrong." Their oldest grandson, Thomas's son Henry, came running around the corner of the house, followed by Grace's daughter Emma. Both children were laughing, engaged in some game only they understood. They waved at their grandparents before disappearing toward the barn, their voices fading into the evening air. "We did well," Hannah said softly, watching the children vanish from sight. "Built something good here." "We did," Harrison agreed. "A family, a home, a legacy. Everything I hoped for when I placed that advertisement, and so much more than I dreamed possible. All because you were willing to dance slow. All because you were brave enough to take a chance on a lonely rancher." The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear William's wife preparing supper, the sounds of domestic life that had filled this home for over 30 years. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed as they settled for the night, and the windmill creaked in the gentle breeze. Hannah leaned her head against Harrison's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady presence that had been her anchor through 3 decades of life's storms and joys. His arm came around her shoulders automatically, holding her close, and they sat together in the gathering twilight watching the stars emerge one by one. "Thank you," Hannah whispered. "For what?" "For everything. For choosing me. For loving me despite my flaws. For building this beautiful life with me. Thank you for answering my advertisement, for getting on that train and traveling 1,000 miles to marry a stranger, for making every day of the past 30 years the best day of my life." He kissed her hair, gray now but still soft beneath his lips. I would do it all again, Hannah. Every single moment. So would I. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against improbable odds and built something extraordinary from nothing but love and determination. The Wild West that had brought them together had been tamed by time and progress, but their love remained wild and free and fierce, enduring through 3 decades of challenges and triumphs. Inside the house, someone called that supper was ready, and Harrison rose to help Hannah from her chair. She took his offered arm, and together they made their slow way inside, perfectly matched in their uneven gait, still dancing slow after all these years. And that was just fine. That was more than fine. That was perfect.